The 1960 Korean horror film The Housemaid, otherwise known as Hanyo. No, yo, no, yo, Hanyo, Hanyo, Hanyo. God, how do you say words again? The 1960 Korean horror film The Housemaid is a horror film with no true evil. It's a movie where almost all of the sympathetic characters are monsters at some point. And it's a really subtle and potent social commentary that's kind of hiding under this really blatant, obtuse, moralizing message. The Housemaid is about a family of four. By the way, the son is played by An Sung-ki. If you know who that is, that's an interesting little bit of trivia, but if you don't know the name, then that's just nothing. They're trying to supplement their income with all of these side jobs for dad and even for mom right after she's just given birth to a child. And they're doing all of this stuff in order to be able to afford this really nice double-story house. Now, despite all of their financial difficulties, they decide to take on a housekeeper who seems to have a thing for Mr. Kim. But it's not long before you find yourself identifying with her, even in her strangeness and her twisted desires. This movie is really about desire and how desire becomes the source of suffering. It's about depravity, and it involves you in that depravity. It's exactly the kind of evil that I know my mom really hates in movies. It's the kind of thing where you find yourself hoping, really hoping for terrible things to happen to somebody, and that makes you kind of a bad person, or at least shows you that there's a bad person in you somewhere too. The music is something that was really good. There was this really interesting effect with the music where the housekeeper that they've hired, she wants to learn to play the piano, but she doesn't know how. So she'll just sit at the piano and just hack at it. But those piano sounds become almost like a Frankenstein of a score.
밤중에 미쳤어?
This horror film is really bizarre and really melodramatic at the level of like a soap opera. I've read critics smarter than myself say that this is restrained, and that it's subtle, which is really weird to read because this movie to me seems over-stylized. The more I think about it, the more I think subtle as a description for this movie almost sounds like a joke, because this movie has these really strong moralistic overtones, but there are also these suggestions that are a lot more subtle that kind of cut against the grain. There are these cinematic cues about things spinning in place for each character. There's a time in this movie where you feel like you are constantly hearing some iteration of just wheels spinning in some form or another, just cutting back and forth between all of these wheels spinning in a way that is kind of subtle, and all of these spinning sounds start to kind of blend together. Most memorable of these for me is
이렇게 좁은 데서 운동을 안 하면 다리가 굳어져서 도망 못 가리라고 생각을 했어. 그래, 틈 있는 대로 굴레바퀴 속에 들어가 뛰는 연습을 하기로 했어.
아버지, 나도 이렇게 연습하란 말이죠? 다람쥐 사다 줘 고마워요.
they want this girl in crutches to exercise more, to strengthen her legs so that she can get out of these crutches. And between them, that's the metaphor. That even though you are caged, you need to keep working so that your legs can get strong. But to us, the audience, this is not quite the metaphor that's coming across. Now, this is not just a good horror film that I've picked out at random. This movie is really influential to a lot of Korean cinema, especially the recent Academy Awards winner Parasite.
역시.
There's a really great interview that I'll link up at the top here with Bong Joon-ho. In that interview, Bong Joon-ho talks about how stairs at this point in history were something that were reserved for upper class people, upper middle class people. If you had stairs in your house, that meant that you had a lot of money. I saw that interview and this movie right before going to see Parasite, and something about that just really clarified and brought into focus aspects of the metaphors in Parasite. I think everyone kind of got the metaphors in Parasite about upper class being physically higher than lower class. But there's something added to that metaphor, and that's specific to Korean culture and Korean film history, makes it a really valuable piece of context, I think. During the opening scene, the camera kind of fixes in on this brother and sister playing this string game called shildogi. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. They each take turns to pull at the strings and untangle and retangle this mess of rope, never quite managing to get it fully untangled. We come back to this moment in what was definitely a studio mandated ending, where Mr. Kim speaks directly into the camera.
여러분, 남자란 나이가 많을수록 젊은 여자를 놓고 생각하는 시간이 많아집니다.
Reassuring us, the audience, that we don't have to worry too much about what happened. This is just hypothetical. It's just a lesson to remind us about the dangers of infidelity. Even if you're attracted to a younger woman, you should be faithful to your wife and don't worry too much about the rest. And I think the movie can be seen that way. I think that's a valid interpretation of it, but don't forget about the rest. Most notable for me, even more than the really interesting ideas about social class and all the visual metaphors, is the humanity of these characters. Even as they behave absolutely inhumanly to one another.
이렇게 됐으니 내가 힘이 돼주마. 난 너를 귀여운 동생처럼 생각해왔어.
전 아주머니 하라는 대로 하겠어요. 전 아주머니를 괴롭히고 싶진 않아요.